At 2:17 in the morning, the Gulf of Oman looked completely lifeless. The water was dark, flat, and quiet. On the bridge of the American destroyer, the only movement came from the green sweep of radar lights sliding across the tactical display. Outside, there was no moon, no shoreline, no traffic, and no sign that anything was about to happen. Then the first mark appeared. Small, slow, northeast bearing, no AIS. No transponder, no commercial profile, no signal that matched a fishing vessel, merchant ship, or routine traffic. Inside the Combat Information Center, the radar operator leaned closer. Surface contact, bearing 048, range 21 nautical miles. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. Out here, every sailor understood one thing. Empty water never stays empty for long. The contact moved at 14 knots, slow enough to seem harmless, fast enough to earn attention. The officer of the deck marked it, logged it, and waited. 30 seconds later, a second contact appeared behind it. Then a third. All three were running dark. No identification, no response on maritime channels, no navigation pattern that made sense. No innocent reason to be moving in formation toward a United States Navy destroyer in the middle of the night. At 2:19, the first contact changed speed. 14 knots became 21, then 26. The radar track sharpened. The approach line shifted slightly south, bending toward the American formation. Inside CIC, the mood changed. Not panic, not fear, something colder, professional focus. Contact is maneuvering with intent. The captain entered CIC without asking for a full explanation. He could read the room before anyone spoke. The screens were already telling the story. 3 fast boats, no lights, no answer. Closing angle. The bridge made the first call. Unidentified surface vessels. This is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. You are approaching a U.S. naval vessel. Alter course immediately and identify yourself. Only static came back. The warning went out again. No response. On the starboard wing, 2 lookouts lifted binoculars into the wind. At first, they saw nothing but black water. Then faint white lines appeared in the distance, cutting across the surface like thin blades. The radar contacts were real, and they were coming in fast. At 2:21, the destroyer's radar updated the picture. A fourth contact appeared behind the first 3, then a fifth, smaller and faster, moving in a shallow arc. This was no longer random traffic, it was a formation. The American destroyer did not turn away. It did not speed up in a rush. It did not flood the night with confusion. It held course, steady and deliberate, because everyone on board understood the difference between restraint and weakness. In CIC, the electronic warfare team began checking the air around them for signals. For several seconds, nothing unusual appeared. Then a narrow sweep crossed the ship. Low power, short duration, directional. The electronic warfare officer looked up. They painted us. The captain's voice stayed even. Classify. Surface search radar. Not targeting, not yet. Not yet. Those 2 words hung in the room without needing to be repeated. Forward on the deck, the 5-inch gun mount rotated a few degrees to starboard. Slow, smooth, mechanical. Just enough to be noticed by anyone watching from the approaching boats. Not enough to be mistaken for the first move. Steel shifted in the dark. Inside the ship, sailors moved with practiced speed. No running, no shouting, hatches secured, cameras activated, logs updated, long-range optics turned toward the nearest contact and found a hard silhouette riding low over the water. Fast craft, likely Iranian. The first boat was now 12 nautical miles out, then 10, then 8. The bridge sent a third warning, this time repeated in Farsi. Unidentified vessels, alter course immediately. You are creating an unsafe approach toward a United States warship. Still nothing. The Gulf of Oman stayed calm around them, but the tactical display was tightening with every passing second. The small craft began to spread out. 2 angled toward the destroyer's bow. 1 shifted wide to starboard. The other 2 stayed back, trailing in a way that looked less like escort and more like coordination. On paper, none of it was a direct engagement. At sea, it was something else. Pressure. The kind designed to force a mistake, force a turn, force a radio message that could later be shown as retreat, force the American ship to either back down or escalate. The captain watched the tracks close. Maintain rules of engagement. Record everything. A thermal camera locked onto the lead boat. Heat bloomed from the engines. Figures moved near the stern. One shape stood higher than the others beside what looked like a covered mount. No confirmation, no assumptions, only evidence. At 2:24, the destroyer's combat system flagged something new. Not from the boats, from the coast. A fixed radar source had activated on the Iranian side of the Gulf. Stronger than a patrol sweep. Cleaner than civilian traffic. It pulsed once, disappeared, then returned. The electronic warfare officer paused for half a second. New emitter. bearing 031, possible coastal system. The captain turned toward the main display. No one spoke for 3 seconds. Outside, the Iranian boats continued closing. Inside, the ship listened to the dark. Then the coastal radar held its lock. At 2:25 local time, the signal stayed fixed for 6 seconds. 6 seconds does not sound like much on land. At sea, inside the Combat Information Center of a U.S. Navy destroyer, 6 seconds is enough to change the feeling of the entire ship. The electronic warfare officer kept his eyes on the signal. Emitter holding, bearing 031, possible coastal fire control radar. The captain stood behind the tactical display, arms still, expression unreadable. Any launch indication? Negative. No object in the air. That was the line. No launch, no impact, no authorization to respond with force. But the boats were still closing. On the main screen, 5 surface contacts moved like pieces across a blackboard. 2 ahead, 2 shifting wide. 1 hanging back outside the others. Not random, not confused. Coordinated enough to matter. The lead boat was now 7 nautical miles out. Then 6.4. Then 5.9. The destroyer transmitted again. Iranian vessels, this is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. Your approach is unsafe. Alter course immediately. No answer. The message went out again in Farsi. Still nothing. Outside, the Gulf remained dark and strangely calm. The only visible motion came from the thin silver chop against the hull and the distant white wake spreading from the approaching craft. On the flight deck, the MH-60R Seahawk was already coming alive. Its rotor blades began turning slowly, then faster, cutting the night into heavy circles of air. Deck crews crouched low beneath the wash. Green and red signal wands snapped through the darkness. The helicopter's sensor operator checked infrared, surface radar, and data link. The Seahawk was not launching to start anything. It was launching to make sure no one could later rewrite what happened. Inside CIC, the picture tightened again. Lead contact now 5 nautical miles. Speed 30 knots. 30 knots. For a small fast craft, that was not an accident. That was a message written in engine noise and white water. The officer of the deck reported from the bridge. Visual confirmed. Multiple small craft. No navigation lights. Lead vessel angling toward our bow. The captain gave the order. Sound 5 short blasts. A moment later, the destroyer's horn cut across the dark water. 5 sharp blasts. The international warning for danger. A sound designed to leave no room for misunderstanding. The Iranian boats did not turn. One of them accelerated. It cut hard to starboard, crossing ahead of the destroyer's projected track. Not close enough for immediate contact, but close enough to force a decision. If the American ship changed course, Iran could claim it had been pushed aside. If the American ship held course, the risk would rise second by second. The captain did not take the bait. Maintain course, maintain speed, log closest point of approach. The closest point dropped below 3 nautical miles. In CIC, every voice became shorter. Track 1 crossing bow. Track 3 widening right. Track 5 holding back. Coastal radar intermittent. Then the coastal signal pulsed again, stronger this time. The electronic warfare console painted it with a sharper return. Emitter active. Stronger sweep. Same bearing. The captain looked to the air defense officer. Status? Self-defense systems ready. Weapons tight. Weapons tight meant the ship could defend itself if the situation became undeniable. It did not mean anyone was looking for an excuse. That was the difference between a professional crew and a nervous one. At 2:28, the Seahawk lifted from the deck. It rose cleanly into the night, nose dipping toward the approaching formation. Its data feed appeared almost instantly on the ship's internal screens. Grainy green shapes sharpened into hulls, wakes, engines, and bodies. From above, the pattern was clearer. The Iranian craft were forming a loose crescent across the destroyer's forward quarter. A pressure formation, not innocent, not yet fully committed. The Seahawk pilot held altitude and moved wide, avoiding a direct overflight while keeping the boats in view. The sensor operator zoomed in on the lead craft. 3 figures were visible. 1 near the cockpit, 1 aft, 1 standing beside a covered object fastened to the deck. Possible crew serve system or launcher, cannot confirm. The captain heard it and said nothing. Confirmation mattered. Assumptions were dangerous. The Seahawk transmitted on-guard frequency. Iranian vessels, this is United States Navy aircraft. You are operating unsafely near a U.S. warship in international waters. Change course immediately. No reply. The lead boat held speed. Then, for the first time, one Iranian vessel pointed its bow directly toward the destroyer. It was no longer crossing. It was coming in. The combat system flagged the geometry change immediately. Track 2 now inbound, CPA decreasing, range 3.2 nautical miles. The destroyer's gun remained trained off the bow, unmoving. The missile cells stayed closed. The sailors stayed at their stations, but the ship was fully awake now. Every sensor was watching, every camera was recording, every second was being written into the official log. At 2:30, the coastal radar came alive again. This time, it did not blink. It held a clean, steady signal from the shoreline. The air defense officer leaned forward. Possible targeting radar, bearing 031, holding lock. The captain kept his eyes on the screen. Any launch? Before anyone could answer, another warning appeared. A small heat bloom near the coast, then a second. The system hesitated for less than a heartbeat before classifying the track. Possible coastal launch. The room went quiet. Outside, the Iranian boats kept moving. Inside the destroyer, the combat system began calculating. At 2:31 local time, the first coastal projectile left the shoreline. It did not climb high. It did not create a dramatic arc across the sky. It came low, fast, and flat, moving over the Gulf like a blade sliding across black glass. Inside CIC, the Aegis system saw it before any human eye could. A new track appeared on the main display. Fast, low altitude, inbound. The air defense officer called it immediately. Vampire, Vampire, bearing 031, range 37 nautical miles. Vampire, incoming anti-ship threat. The word moved through the ship like electricity. No one shouted, no one froze, no one wasted motion. There was only the sudden shift from warning to action. The kind of shift every sailor trains for, but hopes never to experience for real. The captain looked once at the tactical display. Confirm hostile. Confirmed. Sea skimming profile, inbound toward formation. That was the line. It had been crossed. Engage. The order was calm. The ship answered with precision. Below deck, a vertical launch cell opened. A defensive interceptor shot upward in a column of white fire, punching into the night before bending hard toward the incoming threat. On the bridge wings, sailors felt the vibration move through steel. The launch lit the hull for half a second, then disappeared into darkness. Inside CIC, the intercept unfolded across the screen. American interceptor climbing, inbound threat closing, distance shrinking, 20 miles, 15, 10. The two tracks merged. A white flash bloomed low over the horizon, then the radar return vanished. Splash 1. No cheering, not yet, because the first inbound object was almost never the whole picture. 3 seconds later, two more contacts appeared from the northeast. Smaller, slower, irregular altitude. Not coastal projectiles, unmanned aerial systems. Two inbound drones, bearing 046, range 22 nautical miles. The fast boats were still moving. That was the problem. While the coastal system had fired from land, the surface craft kept pressing from the water. One boat cut across the destroyer's projected path. Another accelerated toward the starboard quarter. The formation was trying to split the ship's attention between sea and sky. That was the shape of the operation. Not one object, a network, coastal radar, low-flying threat, drones, fast boats, pressure from multiple directions. All designed to force the American crew into one wrong decision. They did not give them one. The destroyer's combat system sorted the picture in seconds. Missile defense stayed primary. Drones were assigned to the next defensive layer. Surface contacts remained tracked by optics, radar, and the Seahawk circling wide above the formation. The Seahawk pilot pulled farther out, keeping distance from the drone axis while maintaining a visual feed on the boats below. Lead boat still closing. Personnel visible aft. Possible mounted system exposed. The captain heard it. Keep recording. The destroyer transmitted one final warning to the surface vessels. Iranian vessels, a hostile launch has occurred from your coast toward a United States warship. Alter course immediately or you will be treated as part of a coordinated threat. For the first time, one of the boats answered. The transmission was broken, clipped by static. U.S. vessel, you are in Iranian security waters. Leave the area. The captain did not answer the claim. The ship was in international waters. The navigation log showed it. GPS showed it. Radar showed it. Cameras showed it. Facts mattered more than radio theater. The first drone came in low from the east. A defensive missile left the launcher and raced outward. The intercept happened fast. A brief flash, a scatter of debris, then nothing but fragments falling into the sea. Splash 2. The second drone dropped lower. It was smaller, harder to track, and moving close to the surface with just enough variation to complicate the solution. For several seconds, it slipped through the outer layer. The close-in weapon system rotated. Its barrel cluster spun up with a mechanical whine every sailor on the ship understood. Last line of defense. The drone crossed inside 2 miles, then 1.4. Then the close-in system opened up. The sound was not like ordinary gunfire. It was a ripping metallic roar, a stream of light cutting into the night, tracer rounds stitched across the sky. The drone vanished in a burst of sparks and broken parts just above the water. Splash 3. Still no damage. Still no impact. Still no panic. But the surface boats were close now. Too close. The lead Iranian craft had reduced speed, but it had not turned away. Another held wide off the starboard side, running parallel, its wake glowing pale in the infrared feed. Then a third boat suddenly veered outward, as if the failed aerial approach had changed the calculation on board. Inside CIC, the intelligence picture became clearer. This was no random provocation. A coastal radar had locked on, a launch had followed, drones had entered the air. Fast boats had maneuvered during the same window. The captain opened a secure channel to higher command. U.S. warship engaged by hostile coastal launch and unmanned systems. Defensive intercept successful. No damage, no personnel injuries, surface contacts remain in proximity. A pause, then the next line. Request authority for precision response. Aboard the destroyer, the crew kept working. The ship stayed ready. The radar kept turning. The cameras kept recording. The gun mount stayed trained. The Seahawk continued its wide orbit, feeding evidence back in real time. But beyond the horizon, the answer was already beginning to form. On a distant flight deck, ordnance crews moved beneath red light. Bomb carts rolled across steel. Pilots stepped into ready rooms. Mission screens lit up with coordinates from the Gulf of Oman. F/A-18 Super Hornets were being prepared. EA-18G Growlers were coming online. An E-2D Hawkeye crew was already walking toward the aircraft. The destroyer had stopped the first move. Now the United States was preparing the reply. At 2:39, a new target package appeared on the strike planning display. Coastal radar, launch site, drone staging area, command relay, all linked to the same sequence. The Gulf of Oman was still dark, but on the American flight deck, engines were starting. At 2:44 local time, the response was no longer an idea. It was being assembled under red deck lights. On the flight deck of a U.S. Navy carrier operating beyond the horizon, crews moved with controlled urgency. Bomb carts rolled across non-skid steel. Yellow shirts signaled through jet wash. Red shirts checked fins, pylons, safety pins, and release systems. Every motion had a purpose. Every load had a target. No speeches, no anger, just procedure. In the ready room, pilots sat under dim screens as the target package loaded in front of them. The first data came from the destroyer's own combat system: radar tracks, launch bearing, drone approach vectors, and surface contact geometry. Then came the infrared feed from the Seahawk, engine blooms, fast boats, deck movement, covered equipment. Then the larger picture arrived. Satellite pass, maritime patrol data, signals intelligence. A fixed radar site on the Iranian coastline had activated seconds before the coastal launch. A mobile launcher had produced a heat plume. A second site had sent 2 unmanned systems into the air soon after. The pattern matched too tightly to ignore. This was not one nervous operator making a mistake. It was a coordinated network. The strike lead studied the screen in silence for a moment. Then he pointed to the first target. Coastal Fire Control Radar. Second, launch site. Third, UAV staging area. Fourth, command relay node. The room stayed quiet. Every pilot understood what that meant. They were not going after headlines. They were going after the exact pieces that had guided, supported, or carried out the move against a U.S. warship. That distinction mattered. At sea, power without discipline is chaos. Discipline with power is doctrine. The first aircraft to move was not a bomber. It was an EA-18G Growler, a twin-seat electronic warfare aircraft built to tear openings through radar coverage without dropping anything at all. Its underwing pods were already active during pre-flight checks, ready to flood hostile sensors with noise, confusion, and false pictures. The Growlers would go first, not because they were the loudest, because they would make everyone else harder to see at exactly the right moment. Behind them, Super Hornets were loaded with precision-guided systems. GPS-guided munitions, laser-guided options, air-to-air missiles for protection, and fuel tanks for range. No wasted load. No theatrical overkill. The configuration had one mission: remove the threat infrastructure before it could act again. An E-2D Hawkeye was already spinning up above the water. It would become the eye of the package, connecting the air picture across hundreds of miles. Fighters, destroyers, drones, tankers, and command centers would all feed into one moving map. This was how the U.S. Navy answered, not with one aircraft, with a system. At 2:51, the first Growler taxied forward. Steam rose from the catapult track. The aircraft locked into position. The pilot checked the deck crew. The deck crew checked the shooter. The shooter dropped low, touched the deck, and pointed forward. The Growler launched into darkness. Seconds later, another followed. Then the Hawkeye. Then the Super Hornets. One by one, American aircraft left the deck and disappeared into the Gulf night, afterburners fading into black. Inside the destroyer's CIC, the crew watched the package appear on the network. Friendly aircraft icons moved across the screen. Calm, ordered, deliberate. The Iranian boats had finally widened their distance. Not retreating in a rush, not admitting anything, just drifting farther out, as if the failed aerial attempt had changed the math on board. The destroyer maintained course. No chase, no warning shot, no unnecessary move. It had already done its job. It had survived the first push, preserved the evidence, and held the line long enough for the larger system to wake up. At 2:58, the Iranian coastal radar activated again. This time, the Growlers were close enough to answer. On the American aircraft displays, the signal appeared as a sharp spike from the shoreline, a targeting system trying to see through the dark, trying to rebuild the picture it had lost after the first launch. The Growler crew marked it. Emitter active, same site, same band. Then they hit it with electronic attack. The radar did not explode. It disappeared. Its signal broke apart, smeared across the spectrum, and collapsed into noise. To the operators on the ground, the Gulf of Oman would have suddenly become a wall of static. Their screens still glowed, their system still ran, but the picture was gone. That was Phase 1. Blind the eyes. The Super Hornets pushed lower, fast now, controlled, quiet on radar. The Hawkeye fed the air picture from above. The destroyer fed the launch history from below. Every target had already been checked, cross-checked, and tied to hostile action. No guessing, no emotional reaction. Evidence turned into coordinates. At 3:04, the strike lead received final authorization. Weapons tight, confirmed hostile launch infrastructure only. The reply came back clean. Roger, weapons tight. Ahead, the coastline appeared as a dark shape against an even darker sky. The first target sat inland just beyond the beach road, a radar vehicle parked beside a low concrete structure, thermal signature active, power unit hot. Antenna recently rotating, the same site that had locked onto the destroyer, the same site that had held the beam, the same site that had helped open the sequence. The Super Hornet's targeting pod centered the image. The pilot waited. The system confirmed. Target matched, coordinates locked, release cue steady. The pilot pressed the button, a precision munition dropped cleanly from the wing, fell into the darkness, and began guiding toward the coast. Nobody on the radio celebrated. Nobody needed to. The weapon was away. Below in the Gulf of Oman, the American destroyer kept sailing forward as the first strike found its mark. At 3:06 local time, the first impact hit the Iranian coastline. From the Super Hornet's targeting pod, it looked almost silent. One moment, the radar vehicle sat beside the concrete structure, antenna still angled toward the Gulf. The next, the screen flashed white. A shockwave rolled outward. The antenna disappeared. The power unit vanished beneath dust, sparks, and torn metal. The same radar that had painted the American destroyer was gone. No warning shot, no second chance. Just a confirmed hostile emitter removed from the battlefield above the coast. The strike lead stayed calm. Target 1 destroyed. The Growlers continued their electronic attack, pushing static across Iranian sensors. Any radar trying to rebuild the picture met a wall of noise. Any operator looking toward the Gulf saw ghosts, false returns, broken tracks, and empty space where American aircraft should have been. That was the point. Blind first, strike second, leave nothing useful behind. 2 Super Hornets shifted toward the next coordinate. The coastal launch site sat farther inland, partly hidden near a hardened storage structure. Thermal imaging showed signs of recent activity. The ground was still warm. Equipment vehicles were still clustered around the area. The site had acted against a U.S. Navy ship. Now the coordinates were locked. A second munition came off the rail, then a third. They fell cleanly through the dark. A few seconds later, the launch site erupted. The first blast tore open the pad. The second punched into the storage area. Then came the secondary detonation, larger and brighter than the first, as fuel or stored material ignited and lit the coastline in orange. Inside the destroyer's CIC, the battle damage feed came through in real time. No one smiled. They logged it. Secondary detonation observed. That meant the target was real. That meant the intelligence was clean. That meant the system had worked. On the water, the Iranian fast boats finally changed behavior. The lead craft slowed sharply. The boat that had been running parallel to the destroyer turned away first, widening the gap. Another followed, angling back toward the coast. Their wakes bent outward, no longer aggressive, no longer organized into a pressure formation. The destroyer did not pursue. It did not need to. The message was already being delivered miles inland. At 3:11, the drone staging area became the next target. From above, it looked like a small industrial yard. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. A few low buildings, parked vehicles, and long rectangular shelters. But thermal imaging told a different story. Hot engines, recently active launch rails, power generators running hard. The Hawkeye fed the air picture. The Growlers held the electronic wall. The Super Hornets lined up the strike. One munition dropped, then another. The first building collapsed inward. The second blast ripped through the launch shelters. Pieces of equipment scattered across the compound. A small drone frame spun into the dirt before disappearing under dust and flame. Target 3 destroyed. Still no American losses. Still no damage to the destroyer. Still no inbound threat getting through. But the response was not finished. The command relay node sat farther back from the shore, tucked near a ridgeline. Harder to see, harder to confirm. It had not launched anything by itself, but signals intelligence showed it had transmitted during the same window, linking the radar, the launch site, and the small boats into one operating picture. That made it part of the network, and networks are how modern operations happen. Not one shooter, not one boat, not one radar. A chain. The U.S. Navy was now breaking that chain one link at a time. A Tomahawk came in low from the sea. No pilot overhead, no dramatic dive, just a cruise missile flying a programmed route with cold precision, following terrain, adjusting course, and closing on a structure that had helped coordinate hostile action against an American warship. The command node disappeared in a hard white flash. Seconds later, the shockwave rolled across the ridge. Command relay destroyed. At sea, the destroyer kept sailing. The Gulf of Oman was still dark, but the radar picture was changing. The coastal emitter was gone, the drone tracks were gone, the launch site was gone. The Iranian boats were now 11 nautical miles away and opening. The captain stood in CIC, watching the screen return to something close to order. Not peace, order. There is a difference. Peace is trust. Order is what happens when one side understands the cost of miscalculation. At 3:22, the Super Hornets turned back toward the carrier. The Growlers remained on station for several more minutes, making sure no surviving radar tried to reach out again. The Hawkeye circled above the dark water, still connecting every aircraft, every ship, every contact. The strike package checked in one by one. All aircraft airborne, all weapons accounted for. No American casualties, no damage to U.S. ships. On the destroyer, sailors stayed at their posts. The 5-inch gun remained trained outward. The missile cells stood ready. The Seahawk continued its orbit until the surface picture was clean. No one pretended it was over. They only confirmed the immediate danger had passed. By 3:40, the Iranian boats had fully broken contact. One returned toward the coast. 2 disappeared into clutter near shore. The others slowed outside visual range, no longer pressing, no longer transmitting, no longer pretending they controlled the tempo. They had challenged an American warship in the Gulf of Oman. They had tested its radar. They had tested its rules of engagement. They had tested its crew. Then they tested the response. That was the mistake. The United States did not answer with emotion. It answered with sequence. Detect, warn, record, defend, confirm, respond. Every action tied to a hostile move. Every target linked to the threat network. Every strike placed where it needed to go. As the first pale line of morning appeared over the Gulf, the destroyer moved through the water at steady speed. Behind it, the wake spread white and clean beneath the dawn. Far beyond the horizon, thin columns of smoke rose from the coast, marking the places where radar, launch systems, drone equipment, and command links had been minutes before. The bridge stayed quiet. The ship had not blinked. The fleet had not rushed. And the response had said what radio warnings could not. You can approach. You can provoke. You can test the line. But if you fire on the U.S. Navy, the answer will not arrive as a speech. It will arrive with precision. So here's the question. If you had been commanding that American destroyer in the Gulf of Oman, would you have waited for the first hostile launch before responding? Or would you have acted the moment the radar locked on? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want more intense U.S. Navy stories like this, like the video, subscribe to Navy Clash and join the fleet. Because out here, restraint is not weakness. Sometimes restraint is simply the final countdown before the answer arrives.